Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today, and welcome to today's upload. We have 12 hours left until Saturday Nightmares live from New York. I hope to see you all there, but that's not why we're here right now. We are here because I have some experiences and some horrifying encounters to share with you. Before we get into them, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description below. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they really do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's upload, shall we? Today's first subscriber submission. Hey, Jeff. My name's Jim. I've been listening to you for about 2 years, and I've listened to most of your videos as well as many other channels. Well, shame on you, Jim. No, I'm just teasing. I've had my eyes opened to know that there are things right under our noses that we as humans are almost blind to. This was the thing that was slow for me to accept, and continues to be somewhat as my college degree was in physics. In that degree process, there is a lot of hidden and subtle, brainwashing. There, I said it. Therein, I discovered that the superstructure that we know as the scientific establishment is in reality more like a mafia. I can see that they have their gatekeepers who any and all research has to be blessed by in order to proceed or get funded. The gatekeepers look at your conclusions first to see if they support the narrative that they are forcing forward. It doesn't matter what the data is or how valid or invalid it may be. It only matters if you are a team player and you are willing to parrot their position and push their narrative forward. A flaming bad example was the Fleischmann and Pons fiasco with cold fusion. A more recent example has been the Ketchum DNA study with 200 samples. All that being said, I like studying physics because I have a curiosity about how things work. I just want to see the inner workings of the machine. I don't give a rat's ass about the political ramifications of any of it. But if you don't, you don't progress up the ladder in a university, and you don't get the big DARPA money grants, and you don't get tenure. You get the picture? I never wanted any of that anyway. For whatever reason, I was not anything like any of the classmates I rubbed elbows with. I was not a whiz-kid student. Everything seemed to be hard for me. Long story short, I'm not in alignment with the establishment mindset of today's science. I will not do gymnastic handstands to deny what I saw. It's just a data point. It happened. It will be another puzzle piece in the mosaic. I'm 61 years old now. I lived in the same general area until about 6 months ago, since I was about 4. I will say it was in Florida, and now it is one of the 5 largest cities, densely populated now. However, when I was in grade school, the area was pretty rural, maybe a house every city block. The lay of the land was a little above swamp level, but the back of the property went downhill slowly and became swamp in the summertime's rainy season. I had seen our whole property underwater during tropical storms when I was a kid. The whole area gradually became more and more populated until our neighborhood was pretty much urban. Our property was one of the few left that had any sizable woods. However, at the rear of our property, there was a power line right of way with the elevated roadway under it. Then, on the other side of the power lines, there used to be 500-acre dairy farm with hundreds of dairy cows. That got developed later on. We had seen just about every kind of animal Florida had except an alligator. Even up to present day, there are still wild pigs, turkey, and deer, probably in reduced numbers, but there. Fast forward to about 2013 or so. My dad was elderly and suffering from dementia and Parkinson's disease. Looking after him was a full-time job for my mom and me. My mom and dad were both originally from Tazewell County, Virginia. My dad was born near Richland, and my mom was born in Grattan, which is on the north slope side of Rich Mountain besides Burke's Garden. My mom's brother was elderly and was having more and more difficulty managing the farm he lived on all his life. My mom and I would go up during the summer and give him any kind of support he needed. Since my dad needed someone to be with him in the house while we were away, I had a friend I worked with, I'll call him Edward. He came and stayed at my house when we went up north. My dad had been a lifelong antique car restorer, but he could no longer do the thing he loved because of his illness. He had a couple cars left that I was in the process of finishing so they could be sold eventually. One of the cars I would roll outside to work on because I was working with a fuel system. As bad luck would have it, that attracted the attention of some professional burglars. Edward and myself became aware of their attempts to penetrate our garages on multiple occasions, so we had been on high alert status at night waiting for their return. Edward was ex-Army Ranger from Vietnam War and decorated policeman. Though he had some pretty severe PTSD, he was not a man to get afraid very easily. We worked together and covered each other's backs when threatening situations arose. I felt good about my dad being protected as well, as if I was there. In this period of time, we left for Virginia about the end of July to see my uncle in Grattan, Tazewell County. We found he had some problems to be solved, so we stayed there about 2 months. I remember we were planning to come back south near September 11th, and I didn't want to be on the road in case the crap hit the fan somewhere. A couple of days before we were about to leave, Edward called me in the evening and seemed upset. He asked if we were coming back soon, and I said yes, in about 1 or 2 days. He liked staying at my place because it was woodsy and back off the road quite a ways. It had been 100 degrees in the daytime, and the temperature only got down to about 75-80 during the night. We were in the habit of sitting outside right after dusk, in full camo, armed to the teeth, waiting for car thieves to return. Some nights we would sit out until 1 or 2, depending on the vibrations. So, to continue, he was talking to me on the phone and said he had gone outside before dusk to set up a reclining lawn chair in the carport that our vehicles were normally in. He said the chair was nice and the breeze was coming through, and he had fallen asleep. He didn't wake up till about 3 in the morning or so. The carport was open, but had a full-length curtain of plastic shade cloth to keep the afternoon sun off the cars. Mostly you couldn't see through it, and it went down to about ankle-high off the ground. So he said he woke up and was stiff from not moving. So he had gotten up and walked out of the carport, and from behind the curtain there were no lights on them, so the whole area was dark. He said he had wandered about 20 feet out and, as was our habit because of the burglar problem, just routinely pulled his high-powered LED flashlight out of his pocket and did a slow sweep across the back garage, which was maybe 100 feet from him. There was an open mowed field behind this building that went back another 100 yards to the west wood line. As he swept the light across from right to left, His light hit a person right out in the middle of the field about 75 feet behind the garage, right out in the open. He said when it lit it up, it turned toward him and kind of froze. He said they both kind of froze and stared at each other for about 10 to 15 seconds. His light was fairly powerful and he could see the trees that were behind and around it. He said his eyes glowed red as they were self-illuminating. He said it had no neck. It looked like a football player with all the pads on. He said this thing was huge. After they stared at each other, the thing turned 90 degrees and just casually walked across the field into the adjoining woods. He was quite shaken after seeing this, just as I would have been. When I got there about 2 days later, we measured the tree limb that was hanging over his head, and that measured 9 feet, so that put this thing at about 8.5 to 9 feet tall. They don't make people that tall. We talked, and he kept asking what this meant in the supernatural sense, that he would see this thing. But I sure didn't have any answers for him. We both figured it out that it fit the profile of Bigfoot, but I never expected Bigfoot in Florida, much less right out in the densely populated area like this had become. I was aware of that Florida creature called the skunk ape, but no one I knew had ever seen or knew of anyone around here that had. I was aware that there had been sightings of those in the Mayaca Park, but that was pretty far away. I'm kind of conflicted at this point. I find the story fantastic, but also I find the fact that my friend is afraid and shaken to be completely out of character. So I'm pretty sure he had seen something, but what? I believe him on an emotional level, but the thinking part of my brain wants some solid inputs from somewhere to go with before it will be real in my brain. First night I was back home, we just went outside at dark. We had all the cars bunched up, so we had a place to hide behind, so we could retreat back inside if we needed to. We didn't know what to expect. By about 8:30, we started hearing some noises in the wooded lot next door, where the thing had walked into before. We could see nothing, as the palmettos were about 6 to 8 feet high over there. We could hear something moving around. One of my other friends happened to be over visiting that day, so he, Edward, and I had huddled behind the cars like frightened 6-year-olds. We listened to the movement through the brush. Not crashing, but distinct. We sat there for about an hour listening and waiting. At some point, we heard a loud sound come from over there. It sounded like a police siren. I now believe it was mimicking a police or fire truck siren. There was a fire station about 5 blocks away, and they had made a run about 2 hours, all day long usually. Then a few seconds later, we heard the same sound, but from about 75 yards to the west. They went back and forth a few times. From the sound of the brush, they seemed to be going toward each other. Then all went silent. We waited a little while out there, but heard nothing more. We repeated the same thing the next night, and they seemed to be in the same area that next night. We heard them on and off till about 10:30. Then at about 11, we walked to the west end of the property. As we walked, I noted I could smell the faint odor of skunk. Skunk is normally very overpowering, but this was just indistinct lingering smell. As we walked to the west woodline, I continued to sniff the air, trying to localize the smell. We got to the woodline, and the smell seemed to be coming from a certain spot on the ground. I got down on my hands and knees and sniffed closer. It was a spot about 2 or 3 feet in the dirt. Then after we stood there for a couple of moments, the smell in the circle dissipated. I wondered aloud if this smell was residue off the bottoms of their feet. We heard them for those 2 nights, then not again. I believe those sirens-like sounds were being used as a location device, and I believe from their point of view they simply picked a natural sound from their environment to mimic, thinking no human would notice. I can see how they could think that. There were also a huge pack of coyotes in the same woods, and many times a fire truck siren would get them all yelling at the same time, but we figured out pretty quick that there was no fire, truck over in the 8-foot bush right in front of us. But to them it must have seemed as well disguised as an owl call. Over the next month or two, I probed the environment to try to get any sign of these things inhabiting my area. I didn't have to look far. About 10 years ago, I had put up a field fence between our lot and the people on the other side. We used about 3 or 4 rolls of wire and had some short sections at the ends of the rolls left over, several short ones and another about 15 or 20 feet long. I just left them at the west wood line to keep them out of the way of the brush hog. They had been there so long I had pretty much forgotten about them. Once I started looking around, I walked to the rear of the property and across the game path onto the wooded lot next door. I got about 20 feet down that game path and I found one of those small sections of fence wire just lying there. That seemed odd, but I had no mechanism to attach it to. Then about a month later, I set up a ladder and got up on it as high as I could and systematically scanned the wooded lot next door where I heard them. At some point, my binoculars saw something reflect. It was about 5:30 and the sun was low in the west. I repositioned the ladder and focused down on whatever I was seeing. But what I saw did not make sense. The oak trees here, when they get old, they tend to shed limbs off. And if they are undisturbed, those limbs fall down and make a sort of teepee shape of dead branches that encircle and encapsulate the still living inner branches of the tree. It looks kind of like an umbrella that is half retracted but made up of dead limbs. That was what I was seeing, but the sheath of the limbs seemed to have an opening, and I was seeing through the open to the interior. I was in fact looking into a doorway and seeing the inside far wall, and what I was seeing on the far wall was a lining of my same fence wire, reflecting that shiny galvanized grid pattern in the low afternoon sun. I really had to sit and think about what I was seeing. It was probably about 75 yards away in that dense lot. I took note that the oak trees are growing inside a triangular form, about 3 of the largest pine trees on the lot. Strange. I wanted to walk over there and look inside, except I didn't want to. I was afraid it was occupied by sleeping occupants. As the months went by, I snuck up closer, but never got closer than 20 yards. Later that next month, we had a huge hurricane with 160-mile-an-hour winds, and after the storm, all the structures and dead limbs were blown away. But in the next month, I was doing storm cleanup and trimming the trees and so forth. I had cut quite a few oak limbs, so I could now mow under the trees in the front yard with the brush hog. I had about 4 truck bed loads of limbs back near the west wood line where the skunk smell had been and where the path led into the other lot to the teepee. There was an area on our lot that somehow had gotten grown up too thick to mow, so we let it grow. It formed kind of an island of dense trees. It was roughly a rectangle about 25 feet thick, and it went across the back of the lot. Then it was about another 20 feet to the west wood line. I wanted to dump these oak limbs somewhere that they would not be in my way when I mow. So I decided that the grown-up island would be a perfect place. I backed my truck down that alley between the island and the wood line and put the limbs there. But I had an idea. Just to see what would happen, I took each limb and planted the thick trunk end into the soft ground and let the foliage end stand straight up. I arranged the 4 truckloads into a circular enclosure that itself inside the island. I left an opening about 4 feet wide. Somehow I imagined they'd use it as a nest or hide, and if they did, I might see evidence of their occupancy. I was still batting in my head if these things were real or if I was crazy. So after I did that, I came out each day to check for any signs on my limb house. For about 10 days, no signs of anything. Like maybe the 11th day I go back to see it, and I'm baffled at what I see. The trees I put there are still there and appear undisturbed. However, there is now a tree that is about 2 inches at the trunk and about 35 feet tall that is now bent over into a half circle with its tip of the tree touching the dirt, bent like a hoop. The trunk is not broken anywhere. As you go up the trunk, the bending begins at about 15 to 18 feet up. It was not bent previously that day. And there were a dozen similar trees beside it that had not been bent. There had been no storms at all. What the hell is going on here? This makes no sense, but a couple days later it dawned on me. The tree was bent over, perpendicular to the alleyway that I had backed my truck in to unload the limbs. It was about where the front of the truck had been. Then I thought of the railroad crossing gate. I think they are saying, "Do not do this again." That tree was physically blocking my truck from doing the same thing again. That tree is still alive today. Then about the same time, I got a looking at the trees around the edge of the island. What I noticed was that there were multiple old tree breaks that probably happened years ago, and the elbow breaks get higher as the tree grew. As I got to looking more at the elbows all over the edge of the wood line like that, most old and the same way older. Then I noticed the hooped tree on the property across the street and more in the neighbor's wood line on the other side of the wooded lot. The neighbor told me they were afraid to come outside after dark, but he never told me why. But whatever was in my yard was certainly in his as well. They moved away about 3 months later. I think back through my growing up years there, I can remember incidents where I could not connect anything, but that now makes sense perhaps. Some of them were more recently. I am now convinced that they had been there longer than we had. I think they used the dairy cattle as a food source in the 50s and 60s. In the 80s, we had wild hogs suddenly appear in the yard up by the house. You could walk right up to them. We later captured them and ate them. Why would they do that? I think it's because they were being hunted back in the dense part of the woods and felt safer out in the open where we were. The later we had deer that would run out of the wood and come up and stand beside us. I think the same thing about those. Back when I was in about 4th grade, before we had air conditioning, we kept the windows open at night to keep cool. One night I remember hearing a horrible noise. It sounded like the neighbors' horses were being chased around the house. They were almost up against the house and run like hell. Now I believe it was because they were being chased. A few years later, we got a pony from somewhere. I never wanted one, but my dad thought we did. None of us could ever understand why every time we went to catch her, she would run from us like she was afraid of us. Now I have an idea of why she may have been afraid. There have been several more and better incidents going on after I continued to look for signs of these things. I will save them for another episode. And tonight's second subscriber email. Hello, Jeff. My name is Kelly, and I live in a small town in Maine. I've been listening to your channel for about 8 months now, ever since the encounter happened to me. This encounter happened last fall, November 1st, 2021. One of the rules that I have been following since I bought this house is to throw away all leftovers across the street. I had 2 pounds of hamburger that I wasn't going to have time to cook, so I decided to give it to the wild animals. It was still good. There is a Corey dog that has been hanging around here. The sun was bright. It was a warm day out with a slight breeze in the air. As I got to the other side of the road, I noticed something off. I could see an outline of something in front of me. The best way to describe it is the movie Predator, how they showed the creature in the tree. You could barely see it, but it was there. That's how it looked to me. He was trying to cloak himself, trying to blend in. I stopped, and he was about a foot in front of me. His arms were resting on the branches above me. I didn't get a color because it looked clear, like you could see right through it. but I could see the outline of its body. I did not look up. All of a sudden, I hear a question being asked to me. It asked, "Do you believe in werewolves?" This Dogman was talking to me in my mind's eye. I answered, "No, I don't believe in werewolves." And I went on to say I don't believe how Hollywood showcases them either. He seemed confused with my answer, so he asked the question again. I said no. He then he asked, "You believe anything is possible, right?" I said yes. He said, "You still don't believe?" I said, "I've never saw one." I then said, "I guess it could be possible." When I was talking to this creature in my mind's eye, it felt like I didn't have much control other than my answers. My body was frozen in time. It was the strongest thing I'd ever felt. I decided to ask him a question. He didn't like that. I could feel the energy coming from him, which told me he was upset of me asking, but I asked anyway. I asked why this is important to him. He responded, "I will soon find out." Then I started getting dog drool all over my head and face. It felt gross out about it, which shaped me out of the trance that the Dogman had me in. I then ducked underneath what was in front of me to put the meat near the tree. I wasn't thinking clearly when I did that. There's an embankment slope that I had to walk down to get to the tree. I turned back to see what I ducked under, and I saw I went under his legs, and that just upset him, and he let me know with a low growl and asked the last question, "What are you doing?" I respond by saying I'm feeding the animals, but I know now he was referring to how I ducked underneath him. I wouldn't recommend it. Before anything else could happen, my neighbor asked if I was okay. I ran up the embankment as fast as my legs could go. I went across the street to their porch. My neighbor said I was over there for a half hour. I said, "No, I'd just been there for a few minutes." My neighbor said that in my hair it smells like wet dog. I still wasn't feeling quite myself. My neighbor said he could hear a dog growling but couldn't see where it was. Then added, "Must have fallen down the embankment." I said, "Yeah." I looked at my neighbor and said, "I'm not feeling well. I'm going to go home and take a nap. I'm not sure why this is happening to me. It hasn't stopped." The alpha male then projected himself in my living room on Tuesday, April 26, 2022. At 11:30 outside of the house, it was silent. No peepers, no nothing. Again, it was so very noisy here at night. But since these creatures have been here, it's been really creepy with silence. I live across the street from a river, but for the past months, no noise at all. No wild animals at night. All of a sudden, I heard a loud slap on the front of my house. It sounded like there were 3 of them moving from my porch to between the house and garage, like they were circling around at a very fast pace. I was still in my bed at this time. I decided it was time to get out of bed and get dressed just in case I needed to call the cops. I went down the stairs and turned on the outside light on the porch, and I heard my wind chimes starting to make noise. They must have hit them when they jumped over the banister to get away from the light. I then went back to bed fully dressed, just to be woken at 3:30 in the morning. I get out of bed again to a strong smell of bleach in the air that is coming from downstairs. I have a grate in the floor in the spare room across the hall from my room. The smell was so strong that it burned your nostrils. A few days earlier, I had poured some bleach where I had thrown out my urine to hope to cover up my scent, but I think he was under my bathroom window when I did that. Well, on a good note, he will smell clean. I really didn't use that much bleach. It goes to show how they can amplify the scents. This past winter, my pipes froze up and I had to use a bucket. Just so you know, that's why I did it. I got up again and walked down the hall to the top of the stairs to see what I could hear anything from the downstairs. At 4:30, the werewolf was in my living room, pacing back and forth on all fours. It sounded like he was making chewing sounds, like he was eating something. My cat was with me, but he didn't know that. They are good at trying to trick you if you let them. He's trying to give me the impression that he was eating my cat, so I would go downstairs to try and save her. I did think about facing him, but my higher self said no, stay still, not move. My cat went and hid under the bed. She stayed there until he was gone. I started to see a large shadow coming up the stairs, so I turned on the hallway light and went back into my bedroom and closed the door and left my bedroom light on as well. He let out a low growl, pitched noise. He started to pace back and forth again, and all of a sudden my head started to race. I was thinking maybe someone had broken into my house, but wait a minute, I didn't hear any glass break. So I calmed myself down. These creatures are very spiritual and spiritually intelligent. It can hear your thoughts, and it will use it to their advantage. He was trying to get me to come downstairs at 4:40 a.m. I heard a whistle coming from outside across the street at 4:47 a.m., a bird call, and the sound of a bird that is not native to Maine. So I know it wasn't a real bird call. Besides, our birds are not up yet. We as humans lack our spiritual side. It's like a muscle. If you don't use it, it's not there when you need it. I was very fortunate to grow up with a family that was very in tune with their spiritual side. At 5 a.m., I went downstairs. My wind chimes on my porch were all tangled up. There were dog drool all over my living room floor and kitchen floor. Wednesday, April 27th, 2022, I set up a trap. I looked around the room to see where the energy impression was where he came into the house. I found it between the kitchen and the living room. I put aluminum bed frame in that spot with some mercury and set up a spotlight that would go off when he walks in the bin at 9 p.m. I was sitting in my chair at the kitchen table, and my cat Xena was at my feet when I heard what sounded like a cat crying out for help outside the window. I looked at Xena and said, "Well, I know it's not you. You're right here." Xena took off running to hide somewhere. They can't tell where you are in the house. He was trying to trick me again. I went to bed and woke up at 1 in the morning. Thursday, April 28th, 2022. Lo and behold, he's back. He got stuck in my trap. He let out a loud noise, which I can't begin to explain that noise. Then it got very quiet. He's still in my living room. At around 3 in the morning, I heard a bird call again. This time it was 2 bird calls, and at 5:20, I heard 3 more, and they sounded like they were worried. Then there were 4 drawn-out calls coming from across the road. I heard a loud pop noise. He was gone. He had to calm down first to get himself out of the jam he had gotten himself into. Knowing what I know now, if I had the right metal, I could have killed him for good. Good thing I didn't happen, because I recently found out Paul LePage, when he was in office, made it a law that it's illegal to kill a werewolf in Maine because they are on the endangered species list now. Isn't that something? No conspiracy here. Just so I could get some rest, I had my neighbors stay in my spare room a few nights other than hearing the bird calls all night. Nothing exciting. But he won't spend the night again. I think something happened, but he won't say. I could see fear in his eyes when he left. I have more. It keeps going. Thanks for taking the time to read this. I also have a Bigfoot encounter to tell you. It happened October 2021. I never thought I'd see a Bigfoot at the job site I was on, but it soon did happen at the place called Bridgeton, Maine, at the bottom of Shawnee Peak. The camp was on Moose Pond. There is no reason why the right side of the road has all campers on it and the left side only has a few. Now the land has a new owner who is developing land and putting more houses, and the Bigfoots are not happy. To keep the company that I was working with confidential, I'm going to call it commercial cleaning, was what I was doing at the time of the encounter, as far as a coworker who had the same experiences as me, and keep their identity. I am going to give different names so it doesn't confuse me on telling this encounter. It was a post-clean build. Some other state brought up the land and was fixing up the camps. The camps were in rough shape and falling down. The person who put in what I call high-end homes. This person didn't spare any expenses on the home. They had bulletproof windows and metal sheets in between the outside and inner walls, so if something would pound on the outside, there would be no way of getting in. Talk about going to extremes of safety. We showed up in 3 vans, and there were 6 of us that were going to clean this home. The building company couldn't keep their help. They all kept quitting, so we did it. Usually these types of cleaning take about a week or so to do. Our boss wanted us in and out as quick as possible. I wouldn't go into details of what it looked like, but it was beautiful. The contractor did a wonderful job, and we were getting our equipment out of our vans and walking up the path to get to the house. It was at this point a coworker said, "Kelly, look up at the corner of the house." I looked up and saw a sign with a picture of a Bigfoot, and it read, "Beware of Bigfoot," like if you had a sign that said, "Beware of dogs." Instead, it said, "Beware of Bigfoot." At first, I thought it was an arrogant joke the homeowner had made up. Then one of the carpenters said, "There is a sign on every side of the house. Talk about going all out." So I looked at my coworker and said, "So what?" And I asked his thought. He replies, "There is no such thing as Bigfoot." I then laughed at him and said, "Just maybe this day will be the first time you will encounter one." He replied, "You don't really believe in that sort of thing." I responded, "Yeah, I do." Then he said, "The rumor is true. You are really crazy." I responded, "Yes, I am," and walked into the house. I think the lead heard half our conversation and sent me upstairs to start cleaning the back bedroom and overlook the pond. I was cleaning the window and had them open. And when I did, a stinky stench came right up. It smelled like cabbage with poo all rolled over it. Another coworker called Billy said, "Kelly, you could have said excuse me or go to the bathroom." I said it wasn't me, and then said, "Oh, the ghost did it." I said, "No, it's coming from outside." So Billy came into the room, and he looked like he was about to vomit. He covered his mouth and turned around and headed to the nearest bathroom. Michael comes into the room, sticks his head out the window, and says, "Oh, it's just an animal that marked its territory." Turns around and goes back to working, giving Billy a hard time about the smell. I know what was going on, but I had to stay quiet. Then the lead comes in and goes to the window. I tell him and tells me to hurry up. I'm stinking up the whole house. I said, "How is this my fault?" Her eyes started watering from the smell. I guess not everyone can put bad smells out of their mind. When I was done with that room, it was time for lunch. Everyone heads to the front door. I grab my lunch, and one of my coworkers called me over and asks if I had seen anything yet. I said, "No, why?" "I heard something in the bush behind me about 6 feet away." There was, at first glance, it looked like an orangutan in the bush. It had reddish-brown hair, a cone-shaped head. I couldn't see the whole body because he was in the thick brush, and branches were moving all around in every direction. Bigfoot was focused his attention on the carpenter that was all outside cutting up trim boards, so he didn't take notice of us standing there. Was no danger. I then turned my attention to my coworker, and before I had a chance to make a comment about Bigfoot in the bush, Ian comes over and said, "What are you talking about?" And before the coworker could respond, I said, "We're just looking at an orangutan in the bush." If I would have said Bigfoot that close to someone who didn't believe it, would have been a different situation. Ian takes a quick look and said, "Oh, you're right, there is an orangutan in the bush," and turns around and gets into the van and begins his lunch. I then started to walk off and get close to the pond when the lead said, "Where are you going?" I said I was going to eat my lunch on the back deck. She said, "You're not." She said, "I just got off the phone with the big boss. We're all to eat our lunch in the van with the door closed, windows up, and no smoking. The guys was not happy and was looking at each other. Why such strict rules all of a sudden? I get in the van and my coworker asks me, "You're not hungry?" I said, "I'm hungry." I was paying attention to the carpenter who was still cutting the trim boards. We were sitting in the van. The carpenter was 10 feet in front of the van, and there was a white trail in front of him, and the Bigfoot behind that trailer in the bush. I could see the branches moving all over the place. My coworker all had their heads down on their cell phones. Then we all hear this loud snap on the side of the trailer. The carpenter goes to investigate and looks on the other side. He comes back around. His eyes are large, and he had urinated his pants and said, "Swear he's out of here." He had enough. He packed up his stuff and put his stuff into his truck. My coworker looked out to see what was going on. The lead said, "Oh, poor man spilled water on himself." I looked at her and said, "Really?" She looked at me to say, "What would it be?" I stayed quiet. Our lunch break was over. We all started to head back into the house when Ian pushes me out of the way. He couldn't get into the house fast enough, and I started to fall over one of the steps. The carpenter caught me before I hit the ground. He said, "We don't need the smell of blood here." I looked at him and thanked him for helping me. He then said, "You don't seem frightened." I said, "No, I have plenty of Bigfoot encounters throughout my whole life, and I am a believer of all cryptids in the forest." He then said, "I would love to talk more on this. How can I get a hold of you?" I said, "I can't give out that info." I then went inside just to go back outside. I was the one that got selected to move the vans around so the contractors could go home. They don't want to be here any later than 3 p.m. We left around 4:30. As Ian got into the van, I was looking out the rearview mirror. Ian looked over at the bush and punched the gas and hit a tree. He broke the tail light on the back of the van. He noticed there was nothing in the bush. I said, "Bye, Bigfoot," and Billy, who was sitting behind me, kicked the seat for me to keep quiet. That hurts when someone does that. I asked if anyone felt like they were in any danger. They all said no. Why? I then said, "When your hair on the back of your neck goes up, it means that." Then someone in the van said, "Fear." I said, "Wrong. You was tough wrong. It means danger. Fear is always a choice." All right, folks, I hope you all enjoyed this upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I also hope to see you all at 12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for Saturday Nightmares live from New York. Guys, I really do thank you for all of your support. It is your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what makes it a place for people to share their experiences, ideas, and theories with zero judgment, zero ridicule, just the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there, and they're dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions. Never stop searching for those answers. God bless.